My DIL whispered, "She's not real family." At the will reading, the lawyer laughed and handed me the keys to their $6.80 .me house. "Guess whose family now?" I said. I stood in the middle of the grand living room, clutching a casserole dish still warm from the oven. The floor beneath me was Italian marble. The chandelier above was cut glass. The smell of money lingered in the air, bleached, cold, and proud. Emma stared at me from the top of the staircase, her arms folded like she was trying to keep the walls from collapsing. "You're not blood," she said with an icy smirk. "You're the stain on my perfect little castle." It was not the first time she said something like that, but it was the first time she said it in front of the entire family and a lawyer. Everyone froze. My grandson looked away. My daughter-in-law's friends, sipping from champagne flutes, shifted their feet awkwardly, but said nothing. I said nothing, too. I had learned that in this house, silence was my only armor. I used to think love could soften people, that if I kept showing up, smiling kindly, making soup from scratch, knitting warm socks in winter, eventually they would remember I raised the man who built this family. But no. "You're just an outdated accessory," Emma once said, waving a manicured hand at me when I brought her my signature chicken noodle soup. "That soup smells like an old laundry bucket. Honestly, are we still pretending to like this peasant stuff?" Peasant stuff. That recipe came from my mother. I stirred it on every sick day Daniel ever had. From preschool through his college years, the scent of it always made him smile. But in this house, it was mocked. Too brown, too traditional, too me. Then there was the Christmas I spent a week crafting homemade cards, glittered edges, velvet ribbon, hand-stitched greetings, each one tailored to a family member, each one carrying a part of my heart. Emma opened hers, took one look and said, "Looks like a train ticket from 1942. Honestly, trash it. The dog might find it entertaining." She laughed. I did not. The dog, a purebred with diamond-studded tags, did not even sniff the card before walking off. At my great-grandson's wedding, I dressed in my best, an old blue lace dress, the same one I wore to Daniel's university graduation. The moment I stepped into the venue, Emma rushed to block my path. Her voice was syrupy but sharp. "Mother-in-law, this color ruins the Instagram palette." "Blue? Seriously? We said neutrals only." Then, to the wedding planner. "Please have her wait outside during the photos. She's off-gram, off-brand." That was how she saw me. Not family, not heritage, not the woman who taught Daniel to read by candlelight when we could not pay the electricity bill, not the woman who worked 2 shifts so he could go to college. Just a blemish. I was escorted politely but firmly outside the wedding arch. I watched through a window as my great-grandson said, "I do," and I stood holding a gift he would never open, a hand-stitched album of Daniel's childhood, bound in leather, made from the same hide I had tanned myself 40 years ago. That day broke something in me, and I think Emma knew it. She watched me through the glass and gave a little smile, just the corner of her mouth curling upward, like she had won. She always wanted to win. They said I was difficult, that I asked too many questions, that I hovered when I tried to help raise the children, that I was emotional when I cried at Daniel's funeral, that I was clingy when I kept his ashes for a week before handing them over. I once offered to babysit for free so Emma could go on vacation. When she returned, she accused me of being too affectionate with her children. "They are not your pets, and you're not a second mother. You're just the last leftover from Daniel's charity days." She called me a charity case. She, who never worked a day in her life before marrying Daniel, said I was something he brought with him, like old baggage or his asthma. One time, I stitched a small pillow for her youngest daughter. The child had drawn a picture of a son and her family, and I embroidered it into cloth as a surprise. Emma tossed it onto a pile of mail, muttering, "What are we supposed to do with this? Hang it in a thrift store?" I never responded. I never pushed back, because Daniel would not have wanted that. And because I had something more powerful than confrontation. I had time, I had patience, and I had Daniel's trust. What Emma never knew was that Daniel and I had a plan. After his first cancer diagnosis, after he saw how his wife dismissed me, belittled me, and kept the children from me, he started moving pieces quietly. He transferred the deed to the house I now stood in. He moved $6,800,000, 0 cents, into a trust account with me as sole beneficiary. He left me letters, dozens of them in his slanted, stubborn handwriting, outlining every cruel word she ever said to him, and why he wanted me, not her, to carry his name forward. He died with my hand in his, whispering, "You're my home, Mom, you always were." And yet here I stood, in her kingdom, being told I was nothing. "You think you're owed something," she said that day, walking down the staircase slowly, theatrically. "You think raising Daniel gives you status? No, that was your job. He paid his debt, and now you can leave." I looked around at the living room Daniel had designed himself. Oak panels, framed photos of their vacations, the piano I'd bought for their son's 6th birthday. My name was on nothing. My heart was in everything. Emma reached for the casserole dish in my hands and snatched it. "What is this? Lentil mush again? We're having foie gras tonight, Mother. God, why do you keep forcing this trash on us?" She turned toward the kitchen, and then, as if bored of being cruel, she flung the dish toward the sink. It shattered. Lentils and shards of glass sprayed across the countertop. I took one breath. Just one. Her daughter walked in then, holding her phone. "Mom," she whispered, "the lawyer's here for the reading of the will." Emma turned back to me with a grin. "You can go, old woman," she said. "There's nothing for you. You're not real family." She said it like it was fact, like it was final. But what she did not know, what no one in that house knew, was that Daniel had left one last surprise, and it would arrive in 10 minutes with a leather folder and a single sentence that would change everything. I did not cry that night when Emma shoved me into the cold hallway after the collision of casserole and faux foie gras. I did not cry the next day when I lay in my own bed and it felt like a stranger's heartbeat I no longer recognized. I did not cry when I held grandson's hand at the school play, his bright voice my tears unshed, because I had responsibilities smaller, firmer than my own sadness. I baked him oatmeal cookies again. I knelt at his school open house pretending this was perfectly normal. I tied shoelaces, carried lunchboxes, asked about homework, made the same conversation that grandparents do while wearing the same sweater from 20 years ago, even though it smelled of mothballs and old fabric. Because I still trusted that love came dressed in the silence of everyday chores. I never told anyone that Daniel had been arranging things quietly. He told me under his $1,000 quilt in the middle of the night, "When the time comes, you will not be alone. You will have a foundation that cannot be shaken." I nodded. I believed him, but I did not ask how. That foundation had 2 legal pillars. First, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, a structure in Pennsylvania that transfers ownership automatically upon death without probate, cutting through court delays and disputes. Daniel placed our home and key financial accounts under this title, ensuring they would become mine seamlessly. The second was an irrevocable trust. Daniel moved all other assets, investments, savings, private accounts, into a trust where I was named the sole beneficiary. Irrevocable. By design, this trust shielded everything from contest, creditors, and even estate taxes. It was airtight, final, and above all, quietly brilliant. His last act of love, built with ink and intention. I discovered it one evening when Emma had outdone herself. She refused to let me near the Christmas tree, said I was stealing festive vibes. I walked into the study, a room I had arranged, just long enough to fold a napkin shaped like a dove for the dinner table, and there, under a brass lamp, was a folder with my name, in Daniel's handwriting. I knew his hand, even if I could not see his face again. I took the folder home. I lay it on my lap while the air conditioner hummed and the street lights threw bars across my quilt. Inside were clear, elegant documents. A deed showing joint tenancy with me. A trust document, irrevocable, naming me alone. Letters he had written, one for the lawyer, one for me, one to deposit in a safe. I held my breath and looked out the window. Emma's house glowed over the lawn like a cathedral for trophy wives. The soup I never made was probably still inside. No one had thanked me for living. No one had noticed I had loved behind a mask of complaints and cheap comments. I did not smile at first. I swore I would soberly carry this secret until the day of the reading. But that night, when I slipped into my bed, something gave, just at the corner of my lips. A smile broke free, steel and cold, because I knew that the castle that called me a stain was now legally mine, and there was nothing they could do. So I continued to bake cookies, help with homework, tend the garden, every act a quiet step toward reclaiming what I had always been too polite to own. And in that silence, I built my resolve. When the day came to tell the lawyer, I could do it with simple calmness. When the time is right, present the documents. And I trusted that the lawyer's firm, full of Montague Ivy and navy suits, would not quiver under the weight of law, because my husband had already done the whispery work. He had made sure that when the final key was handed, I would be not just a guest, but the owner of their kingdom. I walked into that lawyer's parlor wearing my grief-like armor, my dress clean, the folds pressed and steady, my posture controlled, though my heart argued that I should stop at the front door, should turn and walk away, let Emma have her perfect little castle. Instead, I'd come carrying the leather folder in my purse, the one Daniel had left to me, with care and conviction, my quiet revenge wrapped in every page. Emma, standing at the head of the room, looked like she was sculpted from arrogance. Her silence framed me in accusation. You still dare to show up. I felt the sting of her gaze, the utter dismissiveness. Then she spoke, her voice calm, mocking. You ghost, she spat, her words carved of contempt and distaste. She stepped forward and without warning slapped me, harder than grace, colder than fury. Time slowed. I tasted blood at the corner of my mouth and felt a wave of humiliation strike me where my dignity resided. For a heartbeat, I thought I would collapse. But grief had taught me endurance, and love taught me restraint. I nodded. Silence followed, thick and reverent. The lawyer cleared his throat. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk before me like a calm threat. No one blinked. No one dared exhale. The gold frames of family photos on the walls seemed to darken. Emma's lady friends, poised on their stilettos, looked as though they'd forgotten how to move. The lawyer leaned forward. His tone was unhurried, collected, as though he had all the time in the world, though I knew everything had been timed. He opened the envelope, produced parchment, thick, textured, unbreakable. He read in measured cadence. These assets, including the property at 628 Willow Lane, the investment accounts, and Daniel Reynolds' savings, are hereby declared to transfer to Martha Reynolds by virtue of joint tenancy with right of survivorship, as well as the irrevocable trust established by Daniel Reynolds, naming her as sole beneficiary with no alteration permitted. Probate is hereby bypassed. Ownership vests immediately upon death. Those words landed like hammer blows. Silence recalibrated the room. Every head turned, faces drained of color. Emma's mouth opened, then closed in the shape of shock or fear. The air seemed to crack. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and produced a set of keys, simple brass rings, elegant in their promise, but heavy in their meaning. He laid them flat on the table in front of me. I reached out, picked them up, and felt the weight settle in my palm. Everything shifted. I stepped forward. Lights gleamed on the cold brass. In that moment, I was nearly elevated above the room. I looked at Emma, her expression oscillating between outrage and the dull punch of defeat, at her friends, caught between loyalty and the realization that they too would fall, and at others, relatives, acquaintances who had once called me relic or charity case, who had erased me from the frames of Sunday dinner. I whispered, soft and clear, words that felt like centuries of waiting. Guess whose family now? The air trembled. Emma sagged as though gravity had betrayed her. The sound of breath, once held, returned, as audible as a gasp. My hand curled around the keys like they were the final line of a long poem I'd lived. I looked at every person there. I saw regret. I saw confusion. I saw capitulation. Then I saw hope in some, family I didn't yet know, and in that shimmering moment, I reclaimed everything that matters. Family not of blood but of truth. Property, security, my dignity. Emma staggered backward, her shoes making frightened whispers on the polished floor. The lawyer cleared his throat again and politely invited me to sit, as if I were the rightful owner. I did, each movement deliberate, unapologetic. In the silence that followed, I heard my own breath, as though I were a guest in my own chest. I felt sky and earth meet in that parlor, reality cracks giving way to gentle triumph. I could almost hear Daniel whispering a proud, broken well done. Then people stood, murmuring congratulations, some sincere, some forced. I stood too. I thanked them. My voice was steady, but in my soul I whispered, "This is only the beginning." I know now that the true inheritance was not the house, or the bank accounts, or the keys. It was the right to be seen, to matter, to belong without apology. That afternoon, when I left the house and felt sunlight across my shoulders for the first time in decades, I realized that the house at 628 Willow Lane was more than bricks. It was a beacon, and I, the woman they tried to push out, became its keeper. I hardly expected a live stream, but there it was, shaky footage unfolding on a stranger's phone, posted by someone named Kara, who claimed she lived 2 doors down. I had walked out, keys in hand, from the house where Emma had spat "You ghost," and I was heading toward my car in the cold dusk when my grandson tapped my shoulder. "Granny, there's a woman live streaming you," he said softly, eyes wide. I turned. On a crowd-gathered phone screen, I saw myself, still wearing the blue dress from that aborted wedding, holding the set of keys. The people surrounding me were blurred, snippets of shocked whispers and open mouths frozen in mid-gasp. Then the caption appeared, "Quiet Grandma inherits the house. Stepmonster no more." Seconds later, the word was scrawled across the bottom in bold, "Stepmonster of Pa." Overnight, I became an internet sensation. Comments poured in. "That grandma just dethroned a queen. Love your quiet strength. Stepmonster, more like ghost in the machine. And now, replaced forever. This is the sweetest revenge. You go, Granny." A week later, the local paper ran a headline in large type, "Quiet heir takes throne. Family image crumbles." I held the folded issue in my hands like I held Daniel's letters as an affirmation. My name, Martha Reynolds, was printed above the fold beneath my photograph, smiling, dignified, carrying the keys. People were calling me a survivor, a steward of legacy, a quiet reclamation. Emma texted me that night, her words desperate, trying to find an apology. I didn't answer. The newspaper sat next to my teacup while I wrote check after check, to soup kitchens, to a local fund for women starting micro-businesses. I sealed each envelope with the same fractured certainty Daniel had given me in that folder. The public wave began to swell. Regional television interviewed me on the front steps of the house. I stood, blue dress, gentle in posture but firm in voice, telling viewers, what happened to me was painful, but what's happened now, this shift in kindness, that is worth more than bricks and mortgages. Then came the emails, university writing programs, mentorship requests, local art programs seeking workshops. I accepted them all. I turned the house into a sanctuary not simply for me, but for women like me, who were overlooked, dismissed, labeled inappropriate for their time. Every morning, the news headlines had a new, flattering twist, from forgotten matriarch to social media icon. Inheritance, not of wealth, but of grace. I logged into comment sections, read them, and refused to reply because sometimes silence says more. My revenge was silent because my justice had already been done, by law, by love, and by my husband's foresight. Emma tried one more time on social media. An apology posted from a locked account, calling herself mistaken. It died in the replies. People scrolled past, clicking block. I did not feel triumph so much as relief. The shame she had tried to shame me with had returned to her, but in its place I had been given something stronger. Dignity, purpose, and a voice. A local magazine did a profile called "The Steward of Silence." They quoted me. They said I was not real family. I gave them love anyway, and now, by law and legacy, I am the real family. And the keys? I kept them on my dresser, a quiet symbol. I never turned them to open the door to the old life. I used them to open windows of hope for others. I woke early that morning, not because I had to, but because I slept tightly wrapped in a sense of purpose for the first time in years. The morning light glanced on the keys I'd placed on my bedside table, warm reminders of a promise kept, a justice delivered. By noon, Legacy Academy had its first students, women with stories behind faded eyes, clutching resumes on supply store paper or knitting needles stained with old paint. They came to learn life skills, budgeting, social networking, how to start the tiniest business from scratch. They came because someone listened to them. They came because Emma had tried to erase me, and I refused to vanish. I stood at the front of the old guest room that Daniel and I had converted. Desks made from discarded doors leaned against walls lined with woven goodwill, handmade aprons, mementos, paintings. I taught them how to thread a needle, how to write a cover letter, how respect begins with self-respect. The woman in front of me stared down at her hands. They were steady and kind. She said, softly, "You gave me something I haven't had in years. Belief. That I matter." And her voice shook me because I had wanted the same once. That afternoon, Emma knocked at the door again, pale, breathless. "Please let me see him," she said, meaning our grandson. "Please forgive me." I did not answer. Instead, I spoke quietly and firmly. "Family is not what you take, it's what you give." And I walked away. The granddaughter's laughter echoed behind me in the hall, untainted by fear or longing. Love, I realized, circles back, not because of blood, but because of giving. A local magazine did a feature on Legacy Academy. They called it "A Quiet Air Reframes the Future." In the photo, I held up a note we had written together, "I'm still learning." The caption read, "Legacy is not what you inherit, it's what you pass on." Every day since has been rich with trust. A seamstress whose husband left her, a teenager whose foster mother stopped calling. They came, and I showed up, because the broken have strength, and the silenced can speak again. Emma sent cards, hand-dressed, trembling. I placed them in the shredder without reading. Her apology was too late. The house belonged to more than me now, it was a beacon. As dusk arrived, I sat by the window and pulled out my knitting. Outside, street lamps lit a path on the lawn. Deep in me, something no one can steal whispered this truth: I am no longer buried, I am blooming. I woke before dawn on the day of the grand opening of Legacy Academy. Though I felt rested for once, my heart humming with purpose. The house I now called home, the one Emma once claimed with that sneer, sparkled in pale golden light. I shifted a single lamp by the front door, ensuring the shadows fell just so. I wore the blue lace dress of Daniel's graduation again. It felt like armor. Guests began arriving before the invitations. Women I hardly recognized, middle-aged, older, some with trembling hands or weary eyes, stepped into the foyer hesitantly. They wore coats they had bought at discount rack, wore expressions cleaned by hope. I opened my mouth to welcome them, but the first to speak was a woman named Paula, with knuckles rough from factory assembly work. She whispered, "I've been invisible most of my life. You made me feel seen." I simply held out the door for her, and that was enough. Each woman stepped inside as if entering a church, their lifelong prayers answered with recognition. At exactly 3 p.m, the chancellor of the community college stepped up. He cleared his throat like muted notes in an orchestra. I stood by his side as he tapped the microphone. "What you see is not just a room full of desks and scrap leather," he said. "This is where tired hands will find a trade, where whispers will be replaced with self-sufficient laughter. Legacy Academy is the quiet architect of second chances." Then he nodded to me. I rose and walked to the podium. Someone handed me a small, silver-plated key, engraved with our motto, "Home is made by hands that help." I rotated it between my fingers. My voice, usually quiet, sounded steady. "This key," I began, "is more than a symbol. It is a promise that anyone who's been cast aside, ignored, undervalued, this is a door that opens for you. Our doors are open. Your worth isn't measured by ancestry or Instagram filters. It's measured by what you build with your own hands." Then I started handing out keys. Not the silver ones, actual fobs that opened the workshop doors. Cupboard doors, storage lockers, maker spaces, channeling the real access I once lacked. I handed them to a retired teacher whose school had closed, a girl who hadn't held a brush since foster care, a woman who lost her home to floods last year. I watched the weight of those keys anchor something deep in their chests. At the back, Emma arrived. Late, face gray, dressed in black like she was still at a funeral of ambition. She stood among those I had invited, but forgot to release their grief until that afternoon. She heard my voice, meant for them, and stepped forward. "Please," she cried, sobbing. "Please let me talk to my son. I'm sorry, The sentence broke. She didn't look at the school children coloring in leather offcuts. She only saw the rows of women, heads held high, faces like lit lanterns. They did not stare. They turned away. One whispered, "Go home," very gently. I looked at Emma. Tears ran down her cheeks. Policy and reason were on my side. I could have insisted she decline or held her back, but instead, I offered peace. I lifted my hand, smiled. I remembered Daniel's last words. "You always chose love." "Emma," I said, voice soft, "you are not asked to walk in. Today is not your home anymore." I turned back to the crowd as she stumbled away, crumpled, a figure unfinished. I didn't watch. I looked at the faces looking back at me. The evening closed with shared soup. The same recipe I had once made and forgotten. But now the aroma filled the room with warmth, a church of sound and scent and gratitude. Journalists took photos. Local television aired the moment. Grand opening of Legacy Academy. Teacher, artisan, mom of many, the ticker read. And after, headlines read, "Key to the Soul, How a Forgotten Grandmother Forged a Home for All." Family rewritten, the guardian who finally found herself. Homecoming, a house built from neglect now holds futures. I drove home slowly. Music turned off. The blue dress felt light. My heart was quiet, but full. Outside the academy, the porch light glowed amber. Inside, women worked leather, tapped keyboards, started small crafts, not knowing how much they already had inherited. I sat on the porch swing, my swing now, and held that tiny silver key in my hand. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you choose to give," and I meant it. I woke to the sound of laughter echoing through the hallway of the Legacy Academy. Tiny, confident laughter, full and bright like morning light. It seeped into my sleep-worn bones as I rose from bed. I looked into the mirror at my reflection, strands of silver in my hair, eyes steady with purpose, and thought, this was always worth it. By mid-morning, someone had already painted a mural on the back wall, a winding tree whose leaves were faces, women's faces, each one unique, each one emerging from adobe paint and determination. I didn't help paint. I just stood there quietly while the artist, a former pastry chef who had lost everything, put the final touches on a child's smiling face. They called me Grandma of Legacy. A local blogger titled her post, "Legacy Born from Silence, How Martha Reynolds Built a Family That Isn't Related by Blood." Podcasts invited me to speak. A newspaper featured me, headshot in soft focus, with the quote beneath, "Home, I learned, is made of the people who hold your hands when everyone else turns away." But I felt no pride in being a symbol. Symbols don't build things, people do. The phone rang, mid-afternoon, unexpected. It was the mayor's office. He wanted to honor the academy with a city proclamation. "For your work empowering the forgotten and showing us that legacy is not inherited, it is forged." I told him, "Please don't mention me. Mention them," and gave him names. Carla the welder, May the tutor, Nadia who has no voice except an old camera. The academy hummed. Women clicked needles, practiced interviews, stitched logos onto canvas totes. We baked cookies for clients, taught someone to create a Facebook ad, worked a sewing machine like it was a conductor's baton. I walked among them, introducing myself quietly. "I'm Grandma Reynolds. I'll be here every day you need me." As weeks passed, the woman Emma discarded found confidence. She opened her own online boutique, showcasing leather journals and aprons. Another landed a job at the community college. Their laughter became routines in my day. I would pause, listen, and breathe them in. That was the inheritance I never mentioned to the world, the living ones. One evening, the grandson who once hugged Daniel's knees emerged in the academy. We had named the workshop Daniel's Corner. He stood beside me, touching freshly resistant leather. "Grandma, when I grow up, will I have a place like this?" he asked. I knelt and took his hand. I kissed his head and said, "You already do, sweetheart. You do already." He looked up and smiled. His smile was sunlight that had broken the decades of my waiting. They wanted me to give speeches now, but I said no. My messages were small gestures. Loaning my car for a mother to get to an interview, making soup for someone who can't cook, listening when people feel invisible. That was my covenant. The media called it a quiet revolution. People wrote letters. One said she had just cared for her dying husband and rediscovered her worth through our sewing class. Another wrote she had thought creativity died with age and now painted murals of garden flowers again. Someone asked me to define legacy. I said, legacy is not measured in dollars or keys. It's in the ones who learn to stand when the world is seated in judgment. At the end of each day, I locked up the workshop. You could still hear the hum of machines shutting down, and sometimes, just sometimes, a lone violinist playing in the next room, an artist practicing in solitude. The sounds of dreams landing softly. I walked home slowly under a sky edged with mauve and gold. I pressed the carved key, Legacy Academy key, lightly between my fingers. It was smooth now, worn. It fit both door and memory. A neighbor waved. I waved back, and I wasn't the stained and forgotten woman anymore. I was the keeper of a home not built of bricks, but built of belonging. I whispered once more into the twilight. We did this. We forgave the past so the future could smile. And I let the night answer me not with silence, but with hope. I awoke before dawn broke through the curtains. The house was silent, but I could hear something within me, the echo of every whispered insult, every forced smile, every moment I had been told I did not belong, resolving into calm. I walked to the window and watched the first pale finger of sunlight break across the horizon. It felt like a promise, sometimes whispered but always true. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and went downstairs. The old leather upholstery of the Academy's front door, the one used daily now, was cool and familiar beneath my fingers. I turned the key in its lock, 18th time, maybe more, but like every morning felt sacred. The Academy stirred awake, laughter, the sound of sewing needles, the tapping of keyboards in the computer room. It was alive. I greeted the day and the women whose lives intersected mine. Women who once believed themselves lost, learned that belonging wasn't determined by birth. A voice I recognized, Margaret, who had once introduced herself as just a widow, no one to remember me, laughed and waved a broken thread. How are you, Grandma? I smiled. Holding us together, honey. And I meant it. We settled into rhythm. Some folded fabric scraps, some practiced interviews. A teenager with soft eyes spelled out a business plan for eco-friendly tote bags. The center hummed with purpose. At lunch, I invited everyone to the garden behind the house. We ate sandwiches on homemade bread, soup in blue bowls, and tea in mismatched cups. The steam rose gently. Conversations wove between memory and plan. Someone looked at me, their eyes glimmering. You made this home, I nodded. It wasn't just the bricks or keys or funds, it was the hands, the trust, the shared moments. This was built with love. That afternoon, a journalist from the state paper arrived. She asked, "What does it mean to you now to be called Grandma of Legacy?" I paused, balancing the weight of the words through the afternoon light. I replied, "They said I wasn't family, but I built one with love. It's not lineage that creates ties, it's caring, teaching, giving space for people to become seen." Her pen rests softly. She nodded. I let her go, knowing my story was not for pageantry but for quiet strength. Weeks passed. The Academy hosted a craft fair, families, neighbors, students selling creations, sharing stories. There was noise, color, movement. The posters, "Legacy Lives Here," jewelry, scarves, and stories. I watched a mother hand a leather journal to her teenage daughter and say, "Make it yours." I saw a young man receive a binder with interview notes, tears glistening as he whispered, "I finally have hope." Emma called, using a first name I once forgot she used. She said, "I saw the article. You're doing better than fine. Maybe you could—" I cut her off gently. Belonging is not bloodline. It's the bridge you build when others burn theirs. I hung up. That evening, the house felt full of life. I lit the fireplace in the library, hung a painting drawn by one of the teens, her first portrait. It looked like sunlight growing from paper. I sipped my tea, crimson in the firelight, and thought, love had returned to me, blooming in the hands that once hurt me. Night came and I stood on the front porch, listening to children's laughter drifting through the door, crafts being packed, promises being made. My shawl held years of grief and hope both. I opened my purse and took out the silver key again, The one engraved, "Home is made by hands that help." It was warm. I pressed it gently to my palm and whispered, "We built this." The night answered, not with silence, but with peace. A gentle breeze stirred. I closed my eyes and let the sorrow and gratitude balance. Because, yes, I was finally home. I woke early again, though I did not intend to. The academy was quiet, but my heart hummed with a new kind of anticipation. For weeks, I had thought about something I once abandoned in my youth: cake decorating. It wasn't just about icing or sugar. It was about beauty, crafted hand to hand, memory plated on a cake, a chance to create joy through sweetness. By mid-morning, I unlocked the craft room and cleared away a corner. I pulled out a basic cake board, spatulas, and a bag of fondant petals, items donated by a pastry student who had passed through Legacy Academy. I had never touched fondant. I rolled it gently between my fingers and felt curiosity bloom inside me, smooth and promising. I spent the afternoon alone, frosting a vanilla sponge, layering buttercream, and struggling to shape petals. Every wobble, every crooked swirl made me smile. There was something holy in it, care in small acts, beauty in creation. I thought of Daniel's smile when I used to bake cookies. This was the echo of that memory, refined. That evening, I invited a small group of women over. "I want to learn something new," I said, and they gathered around. They had seen me bring comfort, through leather, through teaching. Today, they watched me bring something sweet and fragile to life. One young woman, Rosa, traced an uneven petal with her finger and said gently, "You made this so we could be happy." We laughed. We tried coaxing roses. We failed. We succeeded. Each messy swirl was our collective triumph. News spread. A local food blogger featured Legacy Academy, not for leather or craft, but for transforming sadness into sugar art. She called it the sweet heart of Legacy Academy. Soon, weekend classes began. We learned piping techniques, edible gold dust, handmade sugar pearls. My hands, aged but agile, remembered kneading leather and learned again how to knead fondant. The students and I baked peach sponge layers, smells that combined old memories of soup days with new ones of frosting laughter. Pickleball came up in conversation, another hobby I thought might brighten mornings. It's gentle on joints, social, and fun. I watched videos of people my age playing, laughing as they delivered soft volleys. I thought, maybe, someday. Every day now, noise drifted through the hallways, spatulas tapping bowls, quiet coaching on cake levels, the hiss of portable mixers, and the sound of confidence building. One afternoon, Emma knocked. My heart tightened. She wore faded colors. She spoke slowly, voice shaky. I saw your display online. I thought making the house my own would erase you. But this? It's beautiful." She paused. "Can I help?" The word cracked between us. I looked at the piping bag, still filled with ivory icing. I thought of the years she poured, contempt, but I also thought of this room, now shining with purpose, and I knew I could offer her a piece of cake. I handed her a spatula. She looked shocked, but took it. Her first roses were clumsy, but she smiled. "We're not baking history," I said softly. "We're baking a new story." After she left, I thought, belonging is sometimes born in flour and sugar, in reaching hands and forgiving hearts. Later, as dusk turned the sky lavender, I stepped outside. Fireflies drifted around the herb garden behind the academy. I held a small slice of layered cake I had saved, peach sponge between rose-tinted buttercream. I took a bite, cool and sweet, and closed my eyes. This was home. This was healing, because sometimes the strongest solace is found in trying something new, delicate, demanding, and full of surprise. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been told you didn't belong, but proved you did, then this space is for you. At Grandma True Stories, we honor the quiet strength, the unheard pain, and the triumphant comebacks of women who refuse to be erased. Subscribe now and never miss a story that reminds you, love doesn't need permission, and family isn't always blood. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our growing family of fighters, healers, and storytellers. Because here, every grandma gets the last word.